In Part 2, Anne discovered that quality health services were inaccessible for many Indigenous women. The Ministry of Health tells her this is because the sector is under-resourced. In this part, she looks into whether this claim about resources is accurate. Anne analyzes budgetary data to find out how much money is spent on the health sector generally and on maternal health specifically. She looks at audit reports to see if funding is reaching hospitals and health centers. She also evaluates fiscal policy to see if public resources are being raised sufficiently, equitably, and accountably. Anne finds that despite being a middle-income country, the government's budget is very small overall, while the percentage allocated to health has been low for a long time. This suggests the government isn't meeting its obligation to allocate the maximum available resources to economic, social, and cultural rights. The chapters in the third part explain how to read budgets and other relevant financial information in order to analyze the allocation, expenditure, and generation of resources.
Resources is something very important in the economic and social rights because it's the conflict on the use of resources which cause human rights violations. And so the debate as to whose resource and who has the right to the resource is a debate that will continue over the few years ahead.
So, a government's budget is its most important economic policy instrument. This affects the lives of all citizens, but especially the poor.
I mean, the resources that in our countries they spend on militarization or military support is much more than spending on education. Although I believe personally if we spend that resources on improvement of the economical situation of the people and also their access to education and basic social services, access to health might be more useful than, let's say, weaponry or militarization.
But there are at least 4 different and distinct stages in any government's budget cycle which provide opportunities for human rights institutions and citizens to be able to engage with governments on their budgets. Government budget formulation is the start of the budget-making process. This is typically something that is led and coordinated by the Finance Ministry or the Treasury of the country along with line ministries. They then present the budget to national legislatures for approval. So that's the second opportunity to engage on budget formulation. After national legislatures approve of the budget, budgets are implemented by line ministries, again in coordination with the Finance Ministry. That's an important point to ensure that what is approved into the budgets is actually spent, which is not a fair assumption to make, unfortunately, in a large number of countries. And finally, is the evaluation of the budgets at the end of the year.
We look at the budget and we look at the socio-cultural and political rights of the people, and then if we see some areas are ignored or isolated or nobody paid attention, so we raise those issues.
What we found, and we've only touched the surface of it, is that you can really find out what's going on if you actually do really good budget analysis, and if you're good at it, you'll be able to find the lie, if you like, in what the political speak might be versus the actual investment reality.
When we come on looking at benchmarks and indicators, it actually helps us to realize more who are the groups that are mostly vulnerable and who are enjoying these rights, how much allocated resources, for example, are allocated for persons with disabilities. Are there plans towards integrating them? How much is allocated for women and the poorest of the poor, and so on? So in looking at the social protection plan, for example, or say a sectorial plan, we can look how much the resources that are being allocated, to whom are they, who are the beneficiaries, are there certain groups that are benefiting more than others?
If you are interested in anti-poverty programs, if you're interested in advancing human rights, it is not sufficient to simply look at the budgets for programs that are meant to achieve those outcomes. In any country, the budget making process starts with the government deciding how much money is available for expenditures, what is called the fiscal envelope. That's the first decision that a government has to make. So if you are interested in understanding whether there is sufficient money for expenditures, you have to look at the tax side of it, the revenue side of it. In most countries, revenues are raised either in the form of taxes or royalties that can come from extractive industries.
In many ways, economic and social rights policy can be boiled down to fiscal policy, tax policy, finance policy. Governments choose where they're going to spend their money. Most governments end up choosing to spend their money, to the extent we're talking about the social sector, on the wealthy or on the middle classes. They choose to exclude the poor or to implement policies that are not at all progressive. If they were to change those policies, then the situation of the poor would be radically changed.
There are some tools that are available to analyze how you can and how to look at revenues and taxes. Human rights institutions and others who are interested in taxes and revenues can look at issues such as tax burden, look at tax administration issues, tax expenditures, as well as natural resource revenue issues. Unfortunately, in a large number of countries, it is not sufficient to simply focus one's attention on whether resources have been allocated equitably. Because what gets allocated in too many instances, in too many countries, do not reach their intended targets and beneficiaries. As is the case with budget allocations and analyzing the allocations of budgets, when it comes to tracking budgets, there are a number of tools and ways by which human rights institutions and other organizations and individuals can undertake such analysis. These include such examples as public expenditure tracking surveys, citizen report cards, social audit techniques. These tools can be implemented by all kinds of organizations. You do not have to be a specialist in budget analysis. If you are undertaking budget analysis for the first time, the key message is don't think that this is beyond you. There's at least two key characteristics to being effective on budget analysis work. The first is having strong evidence-based advocacy. So getting the facts correct, relying on information in government budgets and undertaking an analysis of those budgets in a rigorous way. So there are no shortcuts out there. One has to be very thorough in the research that is done. The second thing, which is perhaps even more important, is that it's not just a number crunching exercise. It's about presenting that analysis in a compelling way that makes the case that governments need to change the way in which they are developing their budgets or administering their budgets so that they result in the kinds of outcomes that we are interested in, better human rights outcomes.